Hi, beautiful IB students. I don't know what happened to my voice. I think the same thing happened to it that happened to Saffron's. So it just all of a sudden was gone. Like fifth hour started and I was fine, and then fifth hour was done, and then Garofano came around the corner and she was like, "Hey, blah blah," and I was like, "Oh, there is nothing left." So I'm gonna try to muscle through this streetcar overview, and y'all are gonna hear me talk about it. So I would have this screen up and then get the Prezi up, and then you can pause this as needed. Because I'm not going to wait for people to write, So, like, you just pause me when you need me to stop talking. Oh. Okay. So I'm going to start with the literary context. Some of my classes got through that. In fact, third hour, I think, is all the way on talking about Tennessee Williams. So if this is third hour, just skip ahead to when I get to Tennessee Williams. But the rest of y'all, I'm going to talk about literary context. So A Streetcar Named Desire is an example of modernism, and modernism is the same modernism that you talk about in art and you talk about in music. So if you're familiar with those, it's the same time period. It's a literary and artistic response to the atrocities of World War I and World War II. Before that, it was Romanticism, and Romanticism isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm in love, but it's more like the glory of war, like these sort of overblown, exaggerated, like the best possible version of everything, and love was very outblown, and just everything. All the topics of Romanticism were like, God is everywhere, and He is in the flowers, and. And so what happened is that World War I and World War II happened, and everyone's looking at each other, and they're like, human beings have never been as horrible to each other as they have just been. What is America? What is humanity coming to? And so they no longer had the taste for this romanticism, and instead they wanted things to be real. And so plays were like this too. They were very very exaggerated and very stylized, and so Tennessee Williams comes along post World War II, and he gives us this play where people sound like they're actually talking like in real life, and America ate it up. So if you want to think about like another parallel, during Shakespeare's time, of course, people didn't walk around speaking iambic pentameter, but the expectation was that when you went to go see a play, that's what it was. And even now, people understand that when they go to see a musical, people are going to break out into song and dance. And that's not the way, real life is, but those are our expectations. We understand that when we go to see a musical, that's what it's going to be like. So when people went to see Streetcar, they were expecting this like overblown, exaggerated speech, and instead they got real people talking, and so that was wild. It was such a huge departure. A Streetcar Named Desire has been continuously produced somewhere in America since its original production in 1947. It's just an incredible play. So the last way Streetcar is not exactly like modernism is it does have a pretty clear beginning, middle, and end, and a lot of modernism doesn't. So that's one way it's a departure, but the rest of it is just really classic modernism. So I want to show you two examples. One is a romantic example of a poem, and then one is a modernist example, so you can just sort of see that difference in poetry, which will be really obvious, I think. So the first is a Byron poem, Stanzas to a Lady on Leaving England. So I'll just read you the first the first stanza. "'Tis done and shivering in the gale, the bark unfurls her snowy sail, and whistling o'er the bending mast, loud sings on high the freshening blast, and I must from this land be gone, because I cannot love but one." And it goes on and on. And then meanwhile, you've got T.S. Eliot, who writes The Wasteland. This is post-World War I. "April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful sorrow, feeding a little life with dried tubers." Can you see how this is really different? And so, if I was there, we would talk about like what are some of the differences that you see between the romantic poem and and the modernist poem. And so if you want to pause and talk about that, that's a good idea. But otherwise, you see that suddenly we have poems that are not written in meter, right? And they don't rhyme. We've got free verse poetry. The topic is very different. It's just a huge departure from Romanticism. Okay, so now let's get to how to read a play. Reading a play is different than reading a book, and of course sometimes it takes a little bit of getting used to because you don't have a narrator. Suddenly you've just got characters and you have to read between the lines. You as a reader have to add in what's not being said. So you've got a character name, you've got the things they say, we call that dialogue, of course. You've got stage directions. That's going to be written in italics, and it's usually in parentheses or in brackets. And that's information given for the for the director, for designers, for the actors. But who is not going to see those stage directions? The audience, right? If they go to see the play, they're also for the reader. But the audience, of course, will see the effects of the stage directions. And the last thing is that probably not everybody knows about is this parenthetical. And that's what we use to describe something that's after a character's name. And it usually gives a little indication to the actor as to how to say that line. Now, we're told as playwrights to try to stay away from parentheticals as much as possible because it gives the actor a chance to discover this character for themselves. But sometimes a playwright will include parentheticals, especially if something's confusing. They'll try to clarify. So that is how to read a play. Also, plays are meant to be read out loud. So if you're struggling, reading it out loud is a super good idea. All right, so here's Tennessee Williams. So Tennessee Williams is widely regarded as one of the most important playwrights in American literature. He was born in Mississippi in 1911. He gained prominence as a writer in the 40s and 50s with The Glass Menagerie, Streetcar Named Desire, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. One thing about Tennessee Williams that's really unusual for the time is that he was gay and he was out about it. It was well known that he was a homosexual. And that was really a hard thing to be in the mid-20th century. So in 1963, his partner, Frank Merlo, died of cancer. And that was also when his plays took a turn in terms of being celebrated in American literature. And so he just went on this huge downward spiral. And so he turned to pills and alcohol and it's, all sorts of addiction. In 1975, you can see that he releases his memoir where he talks about his homosexuality and struggling with addiction. And then in 1983, he died in a hotel room that was littered with, he was alone, and it's littered with wine and pill bottles. And he actually choked on the top of a pill bottle. He put it in his mouth to twist off the cap, and he asphyxiated on it. He choked and he died. So it's just a super, super sad ending. The struggles in his life are paralleled in A Streetcar Named Desire. And when we talk more about that, we'll watch a video on Tennessee Williams in a couple of weeks. And so you'll see those parallels, the abuse in his life and the abuse in the play, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to give too much away. So that's Tennessee Williams in a nutshell. Okay, then you've got characters. So I want to tell you who everybody is before we start. First, you've got Stanley Kowalski. You can read this to yourself, but I will tell you, he's Stella's husband, and sort of he and Blanche, who we're about to meet, are the two main adversaries in this play. So he was in the army, and now he's a traveling salesman, and he works for an auto parts factory, and he's just brute animalistic force, and I'll come back to him in just a second. So then let's move on to Blanche. Blanche is our protagonist, and she is a fading Southern belle. So her family was very, very wealthy, and their family took a downward spiral. So they lived on a plantation, like their family owned slaves during the Civil War, before the Civil War. But now everyone just keeps dying off, and she is left. It's, I think before everybody dies, her sister takes off, and Blanche is just sort of left in the plantation to try to make ends meet. And she takes up a job as a school teacher. And so at the beginning of the play, she has left her job as an English teacher, and she is coming to visit her sister, who is Stella Kowalski. So Stella is married to Stanley, and Stella is Blanche's younger sister. In the play, Blanche will say that she is the younger sister, but she is lying. So Stella is about 5 years younger than her sister Blanche. So she's 25. Blanche is about 30. And I know 30 doesn't seem like very old, or maybe it does to you, but to the rest of us, 30 doesn't seem very old. But at the time, you were ready, you were married and settled by 30 as a woman. And so the fact that she's not is strange for the society, especially for the wealthy society that she came from. So Stella marries down. That's not a very nice thing to say, but she flees her family as everything is falling into disarray. She moves to New Orleans. She meets Stanley, and he's like, this just a new generation, this brand new generation that's never existed, because he's come back from the war and he's got money, and not a lot of money, but he has an opportunity to have a place and to, I don't know, have a life in a way that he wouldn't have without the war. And he also is very confident, Stanley is, because of his time in the war. So Stella's very attracted to that. Stella and Stanley have a very robust sexual relationship. Yeah, isn't that the quote there? Yeah, they share a very robust sexual relationship. So their relationship is messed up in some other ways, but they're very physically attracted to each other. So that's Stella. And then Mitch is our fourth main character. He is Stanley's friend. They were in the army together. He works in the factory where, Stanley is has a better job where he's a traveling salesman for the factory, but Mitch works in the factory. He's about 30. He plays poker with Stanley all the time. He's just a little clumsy. He's just a little dopey. He lives with his dying mother. And he's that guy that's in your friend group who's, he's there and he's no one's favorite, but he's there. I know that's sad. But that's Mitch. So yeah, he's our fourth main character. Other significant characters, you have Eunice. She lives upstairs, and she and Steve are married, and they own the building. So it's like two apartments. They live upstairs, and Stella and Stanley live downstairs. It's just like in one house. Yeah. And then Alan Gray is we never see him because he's already dead. But Blanche and he were married when they were very young, like 19, very young. And he dies. So I don't want to give anything away about that, but you should know that Alan Gray, this play is basically, it could have been called Alan Gray. Because as you'll see, like everything in this play points back to him. And the choices that he makes and the choices he's forced to make. So yeah, watch out for Alan Gray. Okay, lastly, you've got a theme activity, and it's a 4 corners activity. So one corner you're going to label strongly agree. One corner you're going to label somewhat agree. One corner will be somewhat disagree, and the last corner will be strongly disagree. So go ahead and look at all of the statements. You've got 5 statements. And I want you to pause the video and then ask yourself, how do you feel about each of these statements? Strongly agree, somewhat, oh boy, let's see, what did I say again? Okay, strongly agree or somewhat agree, I guess, and then strongly disagree and somewhat disagree. And then what you'll do is, it's not going to be me anymore. You can just stop this, and then after everybody has filled out how they feel about each one of these things, then your sub will call out the first one, and then y'all can go stand in the corner, which aligns with how you're feeling, and then have a conversation together about each of these things. They are all themes or ideas that are present in Streetcars, so it's good to talk about how you feel about these things going in. You don't have to it doesn't have to be the hill you're going to die on, but just how do you feel in general about these things as we go into Streetcar. So I hope you have a good day, And if there's any time that's left over after you do this, please start reading Streetcar and filling out your packet. If you were gone yesterday, make sure you get a packet from the sub. They're green. There's a big pile of them in the classroom, and there's also a big pile of them in my office. And then have somebody who was here yesterday explain to you how it's all going to go down. But I should be fine on Monday. I will see you after Thanksgiving break. And yeah, rest up. And I will do my best to rest up as well. Okay, goodbye. I love you.